So the Brahma Viharas literally translate that word, Brahma Viharas literally translates as Brahma, which means, kind of translates as divine, heavenly, and Vihara, abode or place to live. And I particularly like this second translation of Vihara, a place to live. I think there's something about developing a place to live within the world, and that's what the Brahma Viharas are about. So there are a set of 4 practices or 4 responses to the world: a response of metta, or loving kindness, of compassion, of karuna, of gladness, of mudita, and of equanimity, uppeksha. So they've got these kind of 4 aspects to them. So in a way, we're cultivating those attitudes to being in the world, and those attitudes in themselves become a place to live. So that's the Brahma Viharas. And there's this image that can you guess what that is? It's a tree, yeah, thank you. It's not my strong point. I know some people in this room it is, but not quite mine. But anyway, I like to think of the Brahma Viharas as a tree. So you have this metta, loving kindness, kind of coming up through the trunk, through the roots of the tree, and then you have gladness and compassion kind of reaching out, and then the kind of sky, the big blue sky that we're all bathed in is equanimity. You can also think of it as a bird. That's another image. So the kind of trunk, if you like, of the bird, with the head, is of metta, of loving kindness, and then the wings, which have to balance each other, are of compassion and gladness, and they fly through the sky of equanimity. So I like these kind of images. They help us to get a bit of a sense of the Brahma Viharas, and this sense that loving kindness is the thing that's central to the Brahma Viharas. So when we come into exploring compassion or gladness or equanimity, they are all responses that arise from loving kindness. So in a way, the cultivation of loving kindness is a central thing. So I expect most of you in this room have been doing the metta bhavana at least once, if not 1,000 times. So the Brahma Viharas, in a way, are an extension of the metta bhavana practice. So as metta bhavana meets suffering, painful experience, compassion naturally arises. When metta meets kind of joy and happiness, then mudita, gladness, arises. When metta sees the reality of things, sees that life is made up of pleasant and unpleasant experience, then equanimity naturally arises. Yeah, so in a way, the other 3, compassion, gladness, equanimity, they're not kind of distinct emotional states, something far removed from metta. Yeah, so if you have a sense of what metta is, then the others will be responses that flow out of that. I've completely not followed my notes. That's always a good sign, isn't it? So I went on a 10-day retreat earlier in the year where I was exploring these practices intensively on a meditation retreat, and I think what I found when I arrived on that retreat was this sense that I was being given something, a set of practices that would help me emotionally respond to the world. So the Brahma Viharas, in a way, are an emotional response to the world. Yeah, they're emotional. That's what they are. They're emotions. They're a volition. So in Buddhism, we have this distinction between feeling and emotion. Yeah. So feeling being in a way, very simple contacts that we experience when something happens, whether something's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. That's quite simple in a way. Sun on my body might be pleasant. If I put my hand in an ice bath, that's going to be unpleasant. Very simple initial contact with things. And then we have our more emotional response to things, or volitional, intentional response to things, which is much more just a kind of our intention for being in the world. So in Buddhism, there's quite a kind of distinction between these two things, of feeling and intention. I'm going to come back to that later. So if you haven't got that first around, we're going to come back to that. So, yeah, so this sense of they're an emotional response to the world. They're something that awaken the heart. Yeah, they're practices that help us awaken the heart. And I got quite excited about this, actually. In some ways, it felt like a bit of a relief to be given practices that were going to help me work with the emotions, or yeah, kind of also the integrated emotions into the spiritual life. Yeah. So I think I just want to say something about working with emotions in a way. So I suppose when I first met Buddhism, my emotional experience was quite out of control. So I had a lot of emotions. I often felt quite overwhelmed by my emotional experience. Yeah, and that wasn't a very easy thing to be. I felt, in a way, this word that we hear bantered around quite a lot, I felt quite neurotic in relation to my emotions, I suppose, and a bit out of control. So when I met Buddhism, and you kind of see these images of the Buddha, don't you, looking incredibly calm, kind of grounded. I think somehow I thought this was a bit devoid of emotional experience or something. One had to be calm, and that meant a kind of suppression or denial of all those other emotions that were kind of going on in me. And I suppose through practice, obviously, I've looked at that, those kind of views, but I think there's really something to be said about emotions and our emotional response to the world. I think recently I read this book called Healing Through the Dark Emotions. It's not a Buddhist book. It's by a woman called Miriam Greenspan. And it's looking at the emotions of grief, of fear and despair. And she's talking about something which she calls emotion phobia, and this kind of conditioning that's kind of around in our society these days around emotions. You know, most of us most of our emotional. She's in this book. She's interviewing these women where, you know, in a way, they're talking about their emotional education, how they were brought up to communicate emotions, and you know, one of them was saying, you know, that she'd been told. Like, you can't, you know, you're not allowed bad feelings. We only do happy feelings here, you know, things like that, or you know, different emotional experiences. And I suppose it's this sense that, you know, we live in a culture that does teach us often to suppress our emotions and our emotional experience. So that might be suppression through denial, that might be suppression through addiction, that might be suppression through alienation. So, you know, I think there's something about, or being overbusy, that's another way that we suppress our emotional experience. And I suppose for all of us, we know what we do with that, with our emotional experience. And I think what she's doing in this book is talking about how do we work with, how do we heal through those dark emotions, how can we be friends with them, or how can they be part of our experience. And I think, you know, it's quite interesting, as I was saying, you know, when you meet Buddhism, there can be a sense of like, yeah, it's calming or something like that. We can have a lot of wrong views about meditation and Buddhism when we come to it, and in a way the path of Buddhism is about finding out what right views are and unraveling all our wrong views. That's what we're all doing, that's fine. And I think one of those is to let in all of ourselves. So I expect everyone in this room experiences those dark emotions: fear, anger, anxiety, despair, grief. Yeah. So in a way, we're looking at Brahma Viharas. So we're looking at love and compassion and joy and equanimity. But that's not at the expense of the suppression of or denial of all those other emotions that we experience. Yeah. So there's something about the alchemy that happens. Yeah, when we meet, we have to meet ourselves as we are, and through that meeting ourselves as we are, the alchemy happens. That metta can arise or compassion can arise. So yeah, I kind of wanted just to say something about that. It's, for me, I think the Brahma Viharas present us with a really fantastic opportunity to cultivate positive emotions, but that's not at the denial of other emotional experience that we have. It's really important that we can integrate and be all of ourselves, and not just be who we think we should be. And I think in relation to emotional experience, we tend to have the tendency to either block our emotional experience or drown in it. And I think that can be a really good thing to explore for yourself, what your tendency is. Are you someone who tends to block your emotional experience or drown in it? And I think that's what metta and mindfulness do. They allow us to explore that and to get to know ourselves and to get to know ourselves in an authentic way. I'm going to read you a little quote, changing tack completely a bit. It's a quote by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And he said, "Even if for the moment we cannot actually help anyone in an external way, we should meditate on love and compassion constantly over the months and years until compassion is knotted inseparably into the very fabric of our minds." So I suppose in a way I think this quote kind of offers a bit of a sense of a vision of what the Brahma Viharas can become. So they can become something that we knot inseparably into our minds, in a way that is the vision. So that the Brahma Viharas, although they're meditation practices that we practice, we might practice for 40 minutes or in the mornings or whatever, that actually those practices become more than that. They become the way that we respond to the world off the cushion as well. And although the meditations might help us train to get to know those emotional states in ourselves and open our hearts, so that when we're off the cushion we can do that more effectively, they are essentially a way of being in the world. It's very much a vision. And I know your theme at the moment is this theme of the living revolution. And I was thinking, well, that in a way is why the Brahma Viharas are a living revolution. It's because they are transforming the way that we are in the world. And that's what the revolution is. It's being in the world in a new way. It's being in the world with awareness. It's being in the world with kindness, with compassion, with gladness, with equanimity. And as we get into some of these Brahma Viharas more individually, we'll draw out the radical revolutionary nature that they are and that they offer us, offer a revolutionary way of being in the world, a new way of being in the world. The other thing that I think really strikes me about these practices, so you'll know from doing the Metta Bhavana practices that they have their 5 stages, don't they? So love and kindness for yourself, for a friend, for a neutral person, for someone we're finding a bit difficult, and then bringing those beings together and then trying to spread kindness out to all beings. So I suppose what I find really interesting is when you're in a Brahma Viharas retreat and you're doing these practices, so all those practices have a similar format in that there's 5 or 6 stages. What I find really interesting about it is you don't do a lot of meditation on yourself, and you do a lot more meditation on other people. So you spend over a 40-minute meditation. Most of your awareness or reflection is about other people, be that friends, be that people you don't know, be that people you find difficult, be that the whole world. And I suppose there's something I find really interesting about that. I don't live in your mind, so I don't know what your experience of the world is, but I suppose, in my experience, most of my awareness is just of me, actually. Like, my life, how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, that's what I'm most aware of course, because I see the world through my own eyes. And I think, for me, there's something very revolutionary about these practices where I'm dedicating most of my time to thinking about other people. And I think what really struck me when I was on this retreat, and doing that every day for 10 days was that I thought I'd probably be a lot happier if I spent 60% of my time thinking about other people, or maybe 80% of my time. If I spent more time, even like a fraction more time, just thinking about other people, rather than caught up in my own world and what was going on for me, I'd be a lot happier. Yeah, so that was a bit of a reflection. And I suppose that's in a way what I think these practices are doing, is they're trying to take us out of our own kind of self-referential nature, our own kind of self-referencing of our own needs and our kind of clinging to ourselves and the world, everything revolving around me. And they're helping us broaden out to a sense of other people and their needs and their emotional experience. And a sense of the shared humanity, actually, of the world. And I think that for me is a real relief, actually, just to spend time reflecting on the shared humanity. So, you know, that other beings experience pleasure and pain just like I do, experience hopes and fears just like I do. You know, so are in this sense of, you know, I'm not alone, I am connected. It's not just me that's experiencing pain, it's not just me that's having a difficult time, if that's where I'm at. And yeah, so I think these practices really start to break down the barriers that we put up between self and other. This sense of me and my world, and I'm the centre of the world, to a sense of, oh, I'm sharing this planet with all these beings who are pretty much similar to me, in the sense they're all born, they're all die, they're all happy sometimes, they're all sad sometimes. You know, we're all in it together. You know, and I think when we can start to really feel that, it helps us let go of our own identification with our own lives, which brings peace, and it also helps us connect to others, which also brings joy. Yeah, so they're a beautiful set of practices. So yeah, coming back to this image, so as I said, metta is very much at the centre of the Brahma Viharas. And yeah, it's metta, the other Brahma Viharas, they simply arise out of metta, meeting the world, meeting suffering in the world, meeting joy in the world, and seeing the world as something that arises and passes based on conditions that has both pleasure and pain. So the other Brahma Viharas arise from seeing the world through metta. So it's good to just come back to, well, what is metta? So metta comes from the Pali word mitta, comes from the word friend. So it very much, yeah, it comes from this sense of love and kindness, of friendliness to the world. And it very much is this sense of, it's very much an attitude, it's the way I like to think of it, of a way of being in the world. Yeah, so we'll come back to this distinction between feeling and emotion again. Okay, so I'll give you a quote from Singhamati, comes from Living with Kindness. It says, "We call metta a feeling, but it's more precisely described as an emotional response, a volition, rather than a feeling in the sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And this distinction between feeling and emotion is a basic Buddhist teaching." Yeah, so I suppose the way you might think about that is, say you're having a difficult time, and you're feeling sad about something. Say someone's just died, and you're feeling sad about that. Of course you are. Yeah. So metta in that context is an attitude of kindness to what's difficult in that experience, and that actually might feel quite unpleasant. You know, you might be feeling quite sad, and that might be feeling quite unpleasant. But your emotion, your intention towards yourself in that moment is one of kindness, of metta, is an attitude of kindness. Do you see the distinction? So metta isn't about generating a sense of pleasant, warm, loving feeling. That might arise in the practice of metta, but it might not. So the most important thing in metta is this intention, this volition, this attitude, and that's the easiest word for me, of kindness towards ourselves, whatever's going on, really, in a way. And this is crucial, yeah, because I think otherwise we can think that metta, when we're practicing metta bhavana, we have to somehow generate this feeling of lovey-gooiness, and then we have to square that out to the whole world, yeah. And it's really not about that. It's about meeting yourself and meeting how you feel about other people with an attitude of kindness. Even if you feel angry with a difficult person, even if you feel pretty neutral about a neutral person. Yeah, we meet them with an attitude of kindness, irrelevant of how we feel about them. Yeah. So Sharon Salzberg in her book on loving kindness puts this really, really well. And she says, in practicing metta, we do not have to make a certain feeling happen. In fact, during the practice, we see that we feel differently at different times. Any momentary feeling tone is far less relevant than the considerable power of intention we harness when we say the phrases, as we repeat, may I be happy, may all beings be happy. We are planting the seeds by forming this powerful intention in the mind. The seeds will bear fruit in their own time. She continues to say, when I was practicing metta intensively in Burma, at times when I repeated the phrases, I would picture myself in a wide open field planting seeds. During metta, we plant the seeds of love, knowing that nature will take its course, and in time, those seeds will bear fruit. Some seeds will come to fruition quickly, some slowly, but our work is simply to plant the seeds. Every time we form the intention in our mind for our own happiness or for the happiness of others, we are doing our work. We are channeling the powerful energies of our own minds. Beyond that, we can trust the laws of nature to continually support the flowering of our love. Yeah. So in practicing metta, we plant the seeds of kindness in the world, yeah, this attitude of kindness towards ourselves, towards other beings. And this practice is the practice that's at the centre of the Brahma Viharas. So each Brahma Viharas is said to have their near enemy and their far enemy. So their near enemy is something that looks a bit like the Brahma Vihara, but isn't. It's more self-referential than that. And the far enemy is the opposite. Yeah. So with loving kindness, the near enemy is more of a sentimental attachment. So we think we feel metta for our friend, but actually we're just a bit kind of clingy and attached to them. That would be the near enemy. And that might show up when, I don't know, something happens and we realise we're a bit attached to what's going on for them. And the far enemy is going to be hatred, or the other way. So it's the opposite of that. And you know, that sometimes it can be when we're doing the meditations or we're doing the practices, that those near enemies start showing up, you know, that we're thinking about our friend and we're doing better for them. We, you know, we get a sense of, you know, the kind of attachment that's involved. And that doesn't mean we're bad or wrong, yeah. Like, these things happen, that we're human and we're ignorant to some level. That's what the Buddha would say, you know, that we're ignorant. We believe in the sense as a fixed self, and that's not quite true. And as through deepening our awareness and better practice, we're starting to loosen that sense of selfing and self-referentialness. So, you know, these near enemies and these far enemies will arise, yeah. That's just the way the way things are. And it's like what I was saying about the emotions and the dark emotions. They arise, that's what's happening. Yeah, so our job is not to deny that or pretend that's not happening. Our job is to meet that. Meet whatever's arising with this attitude of kindness and with awareness, and see it as an opportunity to learn about ourselves. Yeah. So then let's talk a bit about compassion. So that's also described in the Pali with karuna. And it literally means to tremble with. I have this sense of to quiver, to tremble with. Yeah, you might just like to think of whether you know that experience in your own life, you know, this sense of where you've really been able to meet the suffering of the world or of another being and let it into your heart and let that tremble. Yeah. So that's what happens, is metta, this attitude of kindness, goes out into the world and it sees suffering. So it might be your own suffering, it might be the suffering of other people, it might be the suffering of animals, it might be the suffering of the planet. There's a lot of suffering out there, yeah. So it's in a way it's a willingness to face up to the difficult side of life and to see that that exists. Of course, the danger in terms of the near and the far enemies is that we can't quite let in that suffering. And I suppose, you know, we can all reflect for ourselves, well, what do we do when we can't let in suffering? I probably just get very cynical, actually, about the world or about other people. But traditionally, the near enemies are talked about in terms of horrified anxiety or pity. So you kind of start pitying other people or just kind of feeling really overwhelmed. So horrified anxiety, the way I think about it anyway, is just kind of complete overwhelm with the suffering of things. It's like, yeah, it's a bit horrified, I can't quite take in the suffering. It's got that bit of a feeling to it. Yeah, so that's the near enemy. And the far enemy is cruelty. Yeah. So I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So I was listening to a talk by Singhamati on the Brahma Viharas the other week, and she said this thing about compassion that I found quite interesting. This isn't a direct quote, it's me phrasing what she was talking about. But she was talking about with compassion you experience less shame in relation to your own suffering. And she was kind of asking people to reflect on whether there's any shame that they're carrying about themselves, and if there is, you know, around their own suffering. So I'm sure we can all just think about that, you know, as something in our lives that causes us suffering. Okay, so if you just think of something in your life that causes you suffering. And then whether there's any shame that you carry about that, like you're not good enough because of that thing that's happening for you. And yeah, that's what the shame is, this sense of like not being good enough. And what she's asking us to tease out is, of course, when we feel shame, sometimes that's because there's something unethical that we've done. In which case, that's something to look at or to discuss, share with friends, see how you might change. But if there's nothing unethical about your suffering, then why do you feel shame about it? Because you don't feel enough compassion for yourself here. So I was thinking about that in relation to myself and some of the shame that I carry about who I am or how I am, things about myself that I don't like very much. So. But then the things about me, they're not unethical, they're just how I am, you know. And I don't have very much compassion for myself sometimes. So, to put that in context, because that might just sound like French otherwise. So, you know, like I was thinking, you know, in relation to some of my health problems, I can carry quite a lot of shame about not having enough energy, being really clumsy, whatever it is, and feel a bit unlovable or inadequate or any of those things. But there's nothing ethical about any of those things, but yet I can carry shame around them. And that's because there's not enough kindness. There's not enough kindness meeting my suffering. There's not enough compassion in my response to myself. And so that's my work, you know, when those feelings arise of self-hatred or inadequacy, to meet myself as fully as I can with kindness and allow that to transform into compassion. So I think that's just a really interesting area. When she said it resonated with me, so I just want to share it in case it resonates with any of you. So we have compassion, and it's interesting tonight we're going to watch a movie that's going to invoke, that's going to allow us to kind of look at the world, and that is not all pleasant. So that will be interesting to see if we can look at the world with the eyes of compassion, and what does it look like. And when we look at the world and the suffering in it, when does horrified anxiety arise? When does that sense of pity arise? And when can we take it in, and when can we just open our hearts with love to suffering? And I think for me, suffering, working with my own sense of suffering, the other regarding nature has been essential. It's like all beings suffer. It's not just me. And when I can get out of my own sense of me in here suffering with my own personal crisis, then and I can see that all beings experience pain, in different ways, in their own way, then I can see it's not just me, and there's some relief in that, I think. I want to say something about this, the far enemy of compassion, so cruelty, and I think because we can hear that word, and which I think I've spelled wrong, anyway, English isn't my strong point, and think, oh, I'm not cruel to anyone. It's quite easy to think that. And it's a bit like when we start exploring the precepts, isn't it? You kind of think, oh yeah, I practice the precepts, so it's easy, I haven't killed anyone, isn't it? But then, so cruelty, I was thinking, well, how do we express cruelty in the world? So, I won't ask you to put your hand up, but have you ever been in this situation where someone's done something to upset you? Probably like a really good friend, or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, something like that. They've done something to upset you, and who's had a feeling of wanting to withhold love, get revenge in some way? There's just that sense, and in a way, that is kind of cruelty. In a way, it's one manifestation. This kind of tendency to evoke revenge or withhold our love, or I'm not going to be nice to them today, I'm just going to ignore them. So all these kind of subtler ways in which we don't meet ourselves or the other person with compassion in that moment. It's like, that's something painful happened there. So can I meet, it was painful for me, and can I meet that with love and express that? Or it was painful for them, and can I meet them with love and express that? And allow something else to unfold. So how do we acknowledge that there's difficulty with ourselves, with our friends, without having to take revenge for it? And then we turn to the other wing of the bird. So I quite like the image of the bird because it's kind of something about balance. I felt more confident about drawing a tree, so you've got a tree. But there's something about balance. So we have mudita, the opposite wing of compassion. So mudita is whereas our metta is meeting someone else's happiness. And it's often translated as sympathetic joy, but that's a bit jargony to me. I prefer gladness. Gladness, a sense of gladness or delight in someone else's happiness. Oh, it's so delightful when one can just cleanly feel delight for someone else's happiness. Yeah, and I think as we practice these Brahma Viharas more and more, then that's what we deepen our capacity to do. We deepen our capacity to feel delight for others. I had this experience most strongly when I just come back from my ordination retreat. So when I was on my ordination retreat, I really took on this personal practice of deepening self-metta, so deepening loving kindness for myself, to really, really take on that I was loved in the world. That was a practice. I did it every day for 3 months. Whenever I got, when everyone had said something nice about me, I took it in. So just banging it off, as we normally do. I took in this practice. I took on a practice of letting in that appreciation of myself. And interesting, the most profound effect that it had was allowing me to delight in others. That's interesting, isn't it? You wouldn't necessarily think that. You'd think it would be like, I'd feel all good about myself. But where it bore through was allowing me to delight in others, because I felt complete in myself. I did not need to grasp anything from anyone else. You know, I could just allow them to be themselves and delight in them. So Sadhanandi, again in her talk, she says this phrase of like, mudita lifts us out of our preoccupation with insufficiency. Yeah. And I think, you know, practicing metta intensively, it met that part of me that feels insufficient enough. That for a time I was in a space where, I was lifted out of that, and I could really just delight in others, and and I didn't experience ill will very much towards others either. And I think that was because I had no need to be jealous of them or to want them to be different or any of those things, because there was something in me that was more complete, so I didn't need anything in that way from other people. And I think to experience that gladness of others, it also, to practice mudita, we also will come up against our kind of cynical edge, like what is it to just allow ourselves to experience joy for ourselves and for others, without getting cynical of like, oh, that's not good enough, who are they to deserve that, or whatever. So I think when we start practicing these things, we start noticing the near and the far enemies. So envy is quite a big, jealousy is the far enemy of mudita. And I'm sure none of us like to think of ourselves as envious or jealous. But I think we're brought up in a society that is very comparison orientated. We're always comparing ourselves to each other, internally, externally. Maybe you voice your comparisons, maybe you don't. They're cleverer than me, they're prettier than me, they're more spiritual than me, they've got more friends than me, I'm, whatever. Actually, whether you're putting yourself as superior or inferior to others, it is a comparison, and in a way that's envy. And I think the more we can practice metta, the more we can love ourselves, the more we can feel complete in ourselves, the more we can just let others be themselves, and we can experience their joy for them without all our stuff mixed in. Yeah. And that's a very delightful thing when it happens. And the kind of the near enemy of mudita is what's called as vicarious pleasure, which is often, I'm not a parent, so this doesn't quite work for me, but it's often talked about in terms of parents with their kids, you know, my kid's doing so well at school, this kind of vicarious kind of pleasure through another person. Yeah. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with being proud actually, but it's more sticky. It's kind of where they cease to exist and you're kind of living through someone else. So just to say a few things about equanimity. So Pali word uppeksha. So this is very much the wisdom aspect of the Brahma Viharas. Yeah, it's the big blue sky around the tree, around the bird. And you know, it's where metta meets the world, meets the world with its pleasure, with its pain, with its suffering, with its joy. And it just meets all of that with love. And it sees that that is the way life is. Yeah, that life is this river of change. Yeah, this thing that is arising and passing as conditions arise and pass. That will weave in times of pleasure and pain. It's interesting, I was hanging out with a friend yesterday afternoon when I arrived. We were sitting in a cafe outside and we kept bumping into her friends and chatting to them. And there was this bit of a theme, you know, they'd say, so how are you now? Yeah, life's been a bit up and down. You know, we'd meet the next friend and they'd say, yeah, life's been a bit up and down. And I think we have this phrase, don't we, that, oh yeah, how are you? Yeah, life's a bit up and down at the minute. As if it shouldn't be up and down. Yeah, but it's like, well, actually maybe life just is a bit up and down, you know, it's like there's pleasure in it and there's pain in it. There's good times and there's not so good times. But actually that's just what life is. And this is the revolution, I think, is when we can just meet life as it is, without our preferences, without needing it to be pleasant all the time. Yeah, without denying and pushing away what's painful, where the suffering is, and just, in a way, just letting it be what it is. You know? So life is up and down. And long may I realise that deep in my being and have a kind and equanimous response to life. What would life be like if we could actually just accept that it's up and down? Be a relief, eh? That's what I think. Yeah. So, uppeksha, equanimity, is this knowing that life is a bit up and down, that it has pleasure and pain in it. And it's just meeting that flow of life with kindness. That's what equanimity is. And it's the wisdom aspect of the Brahma Viharas. And it helps us have a perspective. Yeah. So in a way, that's the thing, is if we could have that perspective, that life is up and down, that when we were in the down, we'd have a perspective. Oh yeah, this is going to change. And when we were up, yeah, this will change too. So we're not so shocked when it changes. Yeah. So it's perspective. Yeah. But the near enemy then arises. So the near enemy is an indifference. It's like, oh, well. Yeah. Indifference. It's going to arise and fall, whatever. I'll just be indifferent to things. And the fire enemy is this craving, as I say, this craving of wanting things to be different, wanting things to be the way we want them to be. Yeah, so pushing away pain. That's the type of craving, pulling in pleasure. Yeah, craving after its pleasure. So that's the fire enemy, is being in the sense of craving. And the near enemy is thinking we're equanimous to life. Actually, we're just a bit blocked and indifferent. We have to know ourselves. There's a quote from this Sangharajta from the survey. He's talking about the perfection of patience, but I think patience and equanimity are along similar lines, and I felt it drew this out very well. He says, the perfection of patience is perfection because there is an absence of the notion of self. The development of patience and forbearance is not so much our ability to withstand pain and discomfort that gets stronger and stronger. It's more our clinging that gets weaker and weaker. So it's like, I haven't quite read that right, sorry, but I'll check it and come back to it. But it's just like, I suppose it's just drawing the point of the quote. It's just this sense of like, when we practice equanimity, it's not that we're practicing our ability to grin and bear it, to kind of grit our teeth and withstand pain. It's more like our ability to just be with the flow and know that this is the way things are, and that there's not this fixed self that's experiencing this pain. That's what gets weaker and weaker. That makes sense. Yeah. Sorry, that's not as clear as I'd like it to be. Okay, so the last thing I'll end on is another quote from Buddha, which is much simpler. He just says, for most of us, the central problem of the spiritual life is to find emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings. So it's very easy to understand the Dharma, to understand the truth, to understand Buddhism in an intellectual way. It's not very complex, is it? You take a very simple phrase of the Buddha that kind of sums it up. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. That is the teaching of the Dharma. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah? So practicing these Brahma Viharas in a way, it's like we can understand them. That's the easy bit. Actually practicing them, becoming them, that's the life's work. So the central problem in the spiritual life is to find our emotional equivalence. Is to take these things that we can understand and knot them inseparably into our being. To come back to that quote from earlier in the talk. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do with the Brahma Viharas. We're not just trying to understand them as words on a page, as pretty concepts for an ideal way to live in the world. We're trying to become them. Yeah, we're trying to become a response of loving kindness that meets suffering with compassion, that meets happiness with gladness, that meets the rise and fall of things with equanimity. So, maybe so. Thank you.